What does a lone, wounded elephant do when it approaches a village, not to destroy, but to ask for help? No one understood its intentions until the people it had been trying to avoid its whole life appeared. What happened next silenced everyone. The heat had not yet risen, but the land was already holding its breath. The sun crept slowly over the dry plains of northern Kenya. The grass lay flat against the earth, still from the weight of dust and silence. In the trees, even the birds were quiet, not from rest, but from knowing something was wrong. The wind moved low across the cracked soil, carrying the scent of dry leaves and old wood. Nothing stirred. Then, out of the far bush, a figure emerged. It was an elephant, male, alone. His ears hung low. His skin, once dark and thick with strength, was now dry and marked with deep creases. Each step he took was uneven, the front left leg hesitating before touching the ground, as if deciding whether it could take the weight. Around his neck, just behind the ear, was a raw wound, dark with infection, and dragging slightly in the dirt behind him, a rusted metal snare still clamped around his ankle. He was not here to graze. He walked through the broken fence of a farming village, not quickly, not with fear, but with something quieter, resignation, a surrender not to people, but to time. He stopped in the middle of the open clearing between two houses and stood perfectly still, chest rising and falling, dust swirling softly around his feet. Children froze, some ran. A dog barked once, then backed away. The older villagers stayed behind fences, watching. No one had ever seen an elephant walk into the center of a village like that. And yet, he did not charge. He did not lift his trunk. He did not make a sound. He stood, eyes half lowered, swaying gently. A man named Abdallah, one of the elders, stepped closer than anyone else dared. He raised one hand, not in warning, but in recognition. Slowly, he shook his head. "He's not here to fight," he said softly. "He's here because he has nowhere left to go." The call to the ranger station came 5 minutes later. Ranger Samir, stationed 30 miles east, was already preparing to leave when the call came through. Single elephant, injured, entered village on foot, no aggression. He hesitated. Elder says it came willingly. Samir did not ask more. He grabbed a med pack, secured his sidearm, and left with his assistant in the back of the truck. But in the time it took him to cross the dusty ridge, someone else was already moving. An old jeep with 2 men passed the checkpoint road without stopping. They carried no uniforms, only equipment. One man had a map with coordinates. The other had a long case strapped across his lap. Neither spoke as the engine hummed over the broken trail. They did not ask about the elephant. They already knew where it was. At 7:26 a.m., the jeep stopped just outside the village. Dust poured from beneath the tires. A door opened. One man stepped out, carrying a tranquilizer rifle. The other stayed near the engine, eyes locked on the figure across the field. The elephant had not moved. Abdallah saw them before the others did. His back stiffened. He stepped in front of the path. "You are not park rangers," he said firmly. The man with the rifle did not respond. A woman from the crowd shouted, "That elephant is hurt. He needs help." Not. Her voice was cut by the sudden sound of the safety catch being flipped. The elephant lifted his head. Slowly, with visible effort, he turned, not away from the jeep, but toward the school building behind the far fence. The movement was shaky but deliberate. He took 2, then 3 steps. He did not run. He could not. Then a sharp crack echoed across the field. A shot, not a tranquilizer. The elephant jolted. His front leg buckled briefly before he caught himself. His trunk swung low. He stopped moving. Blood began to seep from his shoulder, not fast, but dark and steady. The villagers screamed. Someone threw a rock. The jeep's engine revved, and still the elephant stood, blinking slowly, not in rage, not in fear, just blinking, as if trying to understand what had happened. 3 minutes later, Ranger Samir's truck appeared at full speed, kicking gravel into the air. His assistant barely had time to open the door before Samir was out, shouting, "Step away! This animal is under protection. That shot was illegal." The man with the rifle froze. The others stepped back into the vehicle, now facing the ranger's headlights. Samir looked past them, at the elephant. He was swaying again, his weight shifting unevenly. A line of blood trailed down his leg. The old snare was still wrapped tight around his ankle. His breathing was labored, slow, but he had not fallen. Samir exhaled, lowered his voice. "We need to sedate him. Now." Behind him, Abdallah approached quietly and stood beside him. "He came here for a reason," the old man said. "He did not come to die." At that moment, the elephant lowered his head and collapsed to his knees. Then, with a long, exhausted breath, his body gave way, folding heavily into the dust. But what happened next to this animal was even more unexpected. You will not want to miss what comes next. The morning air had shifted. What was dry and still an hour ago now carried a faint sharpness, the metallic scent of blood mixing with the dust. The wind, now stronger, pushed loose leaves across the road and rattled the empty water buckets near the well. Above, a hawk circled low, its wings catching the light as if sensing something fragile below. On the ground, the elephant lay silent. His breathing was shallow. Each rise of his ribcage was delayed, labored. The wound on his shoulder had slowed bleeding but had already drained strength. His leg, the one trapped in the snare, twitched every few minutes, then stilled again. His ears moved slightly, catching the sound of nearby voices but no longer reacting to them. His body had not given up, but it was nearing a line. Ranger Samir knelt beside him, speaking quietly into a handheld radio. "Tranquilizer not needed," he said. "He's already down. We need field treatment, antibiotics, wound care, bolt cutters, and transport." Behind him, the villagers gathered in tense silence. No one moved closer. No one dared. Samir's assistant arrived with the med kit. He moved efficiently, pulling gloves, gauze, saline, and a pain management syringe. But they both paused when the elephant's eye shifted, not in panic, but in recognition. It followed the assistant's hand as he reached towards the wound. Samir leaned in and whispered, "He's still here. He sees us." They began with the leg. The snare had cut deeply. Metal teeth had been embedded under thick folds of skin for days. Infection had already spread. A foul odor lifted as they peeled back the edge of the wound, revealing discolored tissue beneath. Samir turned his face briefly to the side, then nodded. "Clamp first, then cut." The assistant wrapped a belt around the upper leg to slow circulation. Carefully, he cleaned the area, spraying antiseptic solution directly into the open wound. The elephant flinched, but only slightly. His breathing quickened, then slowed again. Samir positioned the bolt cutters. With one hard movement, the steel jaws bit through the rusted snare. The metal snapped with a loud crack that echoed across the clearing. The elephant did not move, but something changed. His eye, which had been half closed since the fall, opened a little wider. It followed Samir's movement as he pulled the broken wire away and dropped it into the dirt. The villagers let out a collective breath they did not realize they had been holding. The next priority was the gunshot wound. The bullet had entered above the shoulder blade. It had not hit bone, but had torn muscle. Samir pressed gently around the site. "No exit wound," he said. "It's still inside. They could not extract it here." That would require tools and time they did not have. All they could do was stop the bleeding, stabilize the animal, and prepare him for transport. Samir's assistant injected a broad-spectrum antibiotic into the thick muscle along the elephant's back. Then, slowly, he inserted the pain relief, careful to avoid stress or shock. The elephant's breathing began to ease, the tension in his massive frame softening slightly. Behind them, Abdallah stepped forward and placed a wet cloth on the elephant's forehead. Not to clean, just to cool. The wind had stopped again. The heat was building. "He is trying," the old man said. "He is still trying." An hour later, the transport arrived, a modified flatbed with reinforced walls and a hydraulic lift. It took time to maneuver the vehicle into position. Chains were secured, supports adjusted, and a padded platform lowered to the ground. Samir coordinated every step, his voice low, steady. As they rolled the stretcher toward the elephant, he stirred again, this time lifting his head slightly. It took everything in him to hold it up. His trunk curled briefly, then fell against the dirt with a dull thud. They wrapped wide canvas straps beneath his body, anchoring them around the frame of the stretcher. With 3 synchronized lifts, the platform rose inch by inch until the elephant's weight was fully supported. The truck creaked under the strain, but it held. The elephant was now off the ground for the first time in days. As the vehicle pulled away, heading for the reserve's emergency veterinary station, a quiet settled over the village. The people watched in silence. Dust trailed behind the truck, and on the metal platform the elephant lay motionless, except for his breathing, slow, heavy, but steady. Samir remained standing long after the vehicle disappeared down the road. "We will do what we can," he said quietly, "but nature will decide the rest." And still the hawk circled above, drifting lower as the wind returned. The turning point in his story begins right now. Everything is about to change. You're not going to want to miss what happens next.